Thank you, folks, for joining us tonight. We have a very special program tonight for Memorial Day coming up. You know, it's not always going to be as fun as the whiskey or some of those other programs, but it's an important one. You know, Memorial Day comes and goes every year with barbecues and the race in Indianapolis, of course, and some other family functions and other things. But the true meaning of Memorial Day, Nathan Maudlin is going to talk about that. And the veterans and what they did at a particular battle during World War II, the D-Day invasion. It's going to be informative. Might be a little touching at some points, but it's a very important program. This is the time of year to have that. So without further ado, Nathan Maudlin.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for coming, everybody. Well, like Ryan was saying, this is kind of a special event in observance of Memorial Day. In September of 2021, Jeannie and I traveled to northwestern France and stayed in a little town called Bayeux, France, and took a tour of Normandy, particularly Utah Beach. And I was moved by the experience. I knew about D-Day and I knew about the invasion, but now we call it a reclamation. Our tour guide told us that the French didn't invade their own country, they reclaimed it from the Nazis. So I try to remember that it's actually a reclamation effort done by the Allies. And anyway, I was moved by being there, and so was Jeannie, because of what happened there. And we've seen movies, and Saving Private Ryan and The Longest Day, that old movie with John Wayne and everybody. But when you actually can see the hills and the beaches and the water and the difficulty that those men must have had when they came onto the beach and eventually successfully established the beachhead, which then led to being able to move the war towards Berlin and stop the Nazis. So tonight, a couple of things. One is I'm going to show you a movie that they show at the Utah Beach Museum. It's about 20-25 minutes, and I think it's pretty good. But after that, I'm going to ask people to think and comment about how does what happened there affect you here. So be thinking about that as you watch this film, please. How about that, huh? I'll tell you. So before I showed that, I said I was going to ask you the question: how does what happened there affect you here? So I'm asking.
Well, we're not speaking German.
Speak up, please.
I said we're not speaking German.
Is that how it affects you? Okay.
Partially.
All right, we're not speaking German. Yes, ma'am.
So, the only French person probably around here, and I'm not even from Normandy, but...
Could you speak up, please?
I'm the only French person here, and I'm probably not from Normandy. Definitely not. But I'm from overseas, and we had a lot of veterans also from the Caribbean going to help the French troops. And so I learned from them, and it's really nice to see the angle from the American side. And now I'm actually living in New Holland.
Yeah.
So it affects me in the way that I am really proud of what America did to liberate France, because yes, we don't speak German, although I have German cousins, first degree. But that's how it affects me, and to myself as a woman and a black woman, I'm not necessarily close to army or military world, but saying. That's the only way I commend it and I support it. So in time of wars, I'm totally for it. Although I know currently in America it's pretty divisive. But I would like to say that I'm really happy to see that. Commending you on that presentation tonight. And I said thank you. And I would have 2 questions. The first one is not too personal. If there are any veterans-related people in the house, I'd like you to say something if you want to. I'm not pressuring anybody, and I would actually thank you for what you did, or your family did. And the second question would be, how do people in Harmony view either people like me coming into town and being part of the community, and second, on the global aspect, how do you see it on the global scale at the moment where the different type of war currently happening that are related? But thank you, Nathan, for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, so her questions are 2. 1, are there any veterans in the audience? I don't think there are any that were serving in World War II, but are there any veterans here tonight? Yes, sir. So, Tom, you've seen this. What effect does what happened there, how does that affect you here, please?
Well, that's a pretty broad question.
Try to narrow it down best you can.
Well, whenever this took place, the United States had not been in the war all that long. They declared war at Pearl Harbor Day, which was 1941, and Sir John Dill, one of the British liaison in Washington, wrote home in late 1942 that the Americans were woefully underprepared.
Okay, and that affects you how?
That affects me how, because what it really says is you have to be prepared. They were prepared because all the way back in the 30s, the Army was working to develop the way that American industry would segue from making cars or not making anything to turning out war materials.
Okay, so we did have a big war effort. I remember at the state fair learning that the only machine that was not military related that was produced was the combine that came out that one man could pick the corn and wheat and not have to have 5 or 6 other guys so they could all go fight. Certainly we had a big war effort and it was successful here. The second question is, how do we welcome a person from France of color here in New Harmony? And does that have anything to do with what happened there? Of course it does, doesn't it? If things had gone the other way, we would be different. Not only would we be speaking German, probably, or something close to it, but I wonder if we would have the freedoms of diversity that we enjoy now. Right? Yes?
So, as a woman, I feel like the war effort certainly got my grandmothers out of the kitchen and into, jobs. And so that certainly paved the way for, us who are sitting here, we women who have been able to get out of the kitchen and have careers.
So it affects you by changing what happened there, changed the role of women in our society.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I would think, or I would hope, that regardless of war efforts in the past and what's going on now, first I want to welcome you to New Harmony. I'm new to New Harmony. I'm glad you're here. But I would hope that just as the men and women in the past and the men and women today that are doing what they're doing, that there are also individuals like us who are not in the war effort specifically in the service, but that we make that difference and we stand up like they are standing up in a different way, but we stand up in our own way. And therefore, all efforts of any of our ancestors continue to live on through us and hopefully into the future through our children and our grandchildren and our nieces and our nephews and our kids that we taught and the people that we run into every single day. I think it's more about looking at being that individual that makes a difference, but recognizing the people in the past who have made that difference that have led the way for us, and not backing down and continuing to do the right thing.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Well, I'm 3 generations removed from this war, but it gives me a framework to look at the future, considering the Ukraine war and the aggression that's happening by a maniacal man who's a dictator and sweeping west towards Europe. And it has echoes of this war. And we have politicians right now in the Republican side of the party trying to question whether we should be helping them or not. And I think through the lens of history, we've learned that you cannot appease, you cannot back down, and you need to act first instead of just waiting to see what happens.
So you're seeing perhaps history being repeated
Absolutely.
today.
Absolutely.
And as I'm sure you've read, there were similar hesitations to get involved in their war 70 years ago. Well, let me tell you, yes, Melissa.
I can speak to an experience related directly to New Harmony. I grew up here. In the late 70s, New Harmony had a very active training program with Dictator, Germany, where the rabbis hailed from. And five of my schoolmates and my junior year in high school, the superintendent brought over an exchange teacher from Germany to teach German 1 at New Harmony School. And I enrolled in that class along with 4 or 5 other classmates. And that summer, between my junior and senior year, 5 New Harmony students and 7 North Cozy students, North Cozy had a strong German program as well, went to Biernsheim for the summer on an exchange program. And we stayed with families, we went to school every day with them, and did all kinds of things in the community. And then a year later, 12 students from Biernsheim area, Iptingen, there were 3 villages associated with Biernsheim, came to New Harmony and Cozyville and stayed for a couple of months and went to school with us. And that was a very transformational experience for all of us at that age, and showed us that people on the other side of the Atlantic are just like us. They just speak a different language. And the whole community was involved in that. We had potluck dinners and presentations and everything on both sides. So if you're looking for a specific New Harmony experience, an event and a relationship that New Harmony had with Biernsheim at that time would not have happened at this time.
A rapprochement, where we reapproach the Germans, and now they're our allies. Same with the Japanese, right? Well, I got to tell you, when we went to Normandy, and I was watching this movie and seeing everything, and noticing the sacrifice that those people made, getting out of the boat and running up on a beach and getting shot at and mangled and killed, and just, I can't even imagine it. I got to tell you, I felt a little bit of ashamed of us. And what I mean is that with the current polarization that we have in our country right now, extreme views, and I'm not with you and I'm not with you, and we see people who we disagree with as enemies, and we act it out in almost any subject that there is, whether it be a court case or a presidential election or whatever. And we're so divided that I think it's a little bit shameful, given what those people sacrificed for us. And for me, and I'm guilty of thinking like that sometimes. I'm guilty. So for me, I made it, I made myself remember my days when I was a group therapist, all right? Before I became an attorney, I did group therapy, and I followed a mode of group therapy instituted by a therapist named Carl Rogers. And Carl Rogers approached therapy from the position of unconditional positive regard for the other person. And he believed that everybody is doing the best they can with what they have. Now, that does not mean that there aren't consequences for behavior. It doesn't mean that everything's okay. But what it does mean is that when you're interacting with another person, that you listen and you try to put yourself in their shoes to understand and work towards some type of common progress. That's what I thought we weren't doing when I was there at Normandy. Those guys worked together, and they stopped a fascist dictator from taking over the world. That's all there is to it. And I think we honor them more if we look at our own lives and evaluate or structure our behavior so that we can see the positive in the other person, even though we may disagree, and sometimes disagree quite strongly with them on any particular subject. So that's kind of what I took away from my trip to Normandy. And it's my goal for me to follow the Carl Rogers thing that I used to follow in group therapy. I saw that. No, but anyway, to follow that the best I can. So, now for some photos. These are just some photos that Jeannie took while we were there. And, that's part of the beach. Oh yeah, this is good. This is a map of Utah Beach. I'd like to call your attention to up there on the left, about halfway up where you say Ingles. Do you see that town? St. Mary Ingles. That's the town where there's the church, where the guy that paratrooped in and got caught on the church. Did you see the movie The Longest Day? Red Buttons was stuck up there. That guy's name was John Steele, and he lived. And he fought in the war, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and lived through the war. And if you look him up online, you can see pictures of him coming back there at that church he was hanging from, 20, 30, 40 years later. But then you can also see with the Utah Beach there to the west. And I'm sure you caught that in the movie, but the reason that part was so important was above that was a deep water port that was very much controlled by the Germans, and we needed that so that we could land our supplies and tanks and everything to come in and move towards Berlin. Now that sign says Utah Beach.
Thank you.
You're welcome. These are just some more views of the terrain. The men would have to climb. This may not be Utah Beach. This may be further north, but where they have to actually climb up and scale hills that are almost straight up to achieve the mission. This is a picture of one of the German places where they had their strongholds with the machine guns, etc. There's another one. I think we saw that in the movie, the stronghold at the top of Utah Beach that they were hoping they could capture, and they captured it, I think, maybe easier than they thought they would. Now, that's Jeannie, my wife, standing in a crater. You remember in the movie where they talked about we were bombing before our troops landed, and that's a hole that was blown out of the ground. That's there, and that's another one with one of the people that led the charge at Utah Beach. And another picture of the beaches and water, and another view of coming up, scaling the walls. And then we visited the cemetery. That's a tomb. That's a marker for Elizabeth Richardson, American Red Cross. She's from Indiana, and she died there on July 25th, 1945. So she was there for a while after the D-Day invasion and was working and still got killed over a year later. And there's the picture of the cemetery overlooking the water. I believe that would be the English Channel, unless the French call it something different. I don't know. And another view. Finally, at 5 o'clock, they retire the colors every evening. And it's a solemn ceremony. They play taps. There was a crowd there when we were there. And they actually did it twice the day we were there, because there was a fellow who had been there, and they lowered him and gave him the flag. So, thank you for your attention.
So let's remember that when we're having our burgers and our dogs and we're watching the Indianapolis 500 this Sunday. You know, the memorial part of Memorial Day sometimes goes over a little too quickly, I think. June 8th, 6:30. We're taking you back to France under different circumstances. France during COVID, or Why I Love the Frogs by Connie Winesapple will be here for that important lecture. Also, June 29th, the Know Your Community series continues with Amy Cook from the Ford Home. Right here at the WMI, free as always, 6:30. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Happy Memorial Day.